Okay, good morning, everybody. We're waiting for one more speaker, but I think she'll probably come. Laura Tresca, she's not here? Okay. Okay, excellent. So I think we should start because we don't have a huge amount of time this morning. Well, my name is Guy. This is Laura. Eh? Please come join us. So my name is Guy Berger. I'm Director for Freedom of Expression at UNESCO. Thank you all for coming. Thanks very much to our panel here. Of course, everybody here will know the news from yesterday. Normally, at a time like this, people say, let us have a minute of silence for the beheading of Steven Sotloff. I prefer to say, let us have a minute of anger for the beheading of Steven Sotloff. This, this goes even further than most killings of journalists. It's not simply that he's an American. It's not simply that he reports for international affairs. This is because he's a journalist and they think they will get coverage because of this. It was a situation like this in Algeria way back 10 years ago when it didn't matter what kind of journalist you were, they would kill you because of your visibility as a journalist. So we're back in that cycle. So let us just pause for 5-10 seconds, please. Just think a moment of anger about this kind of targeting of people simply because of their profession. Okay, let's address this topic now of the digital safety of journalists. Today, we as UNESCO are launching research on this subject of the safety of journalists and especially the digital dimension. A publication will follow. So we've got the research. We don't yet have it in publication form. I apologize. But the research is extremely interesting. And our panelists here are going to comment a bit on the research, but really emphasize some of the points that are coming out about what does it mean to have digital safety to do journalism. So I thought I would start just by a quick PowerPoint to summarize what the research, some of the key points of the research. So if I can ask the technical people to please give us the PowerPoint there. Super. So what I'll speak about in this short presentation is who has a stake in this issue of digital security for journalism. That is an interesting question that this research addresses. What it's about. Some of the insights, there are many insights, I won't deal with all of them, but some of the insights which are quite interesting. And I'll also mention a few of the recommendations. This research also looked at the resources. Where can people go to get more information on this subject? 3 researchers did this work for us, and we thank them. And we thank Denmark because they paid for the research to be done. Okay, so what really emerged in this research is that it's technical, but it's much more than technical. Okay, I think that's a very profound thing to think about. And you'll see how this unpacks as we go. There were studies from different parts of the world, and now we're going to hear from one of our speakers about some more cases, particularly in Latin America. It looks at the kind of preventive, protective, and preemptive measures to secure the freedom of journalism where there's a digital dimension. It also, this research looked at what is the role of governments in this thing, what is those who contribute to journalism. I'm not saying journalists, I'm saying those who contribute to journalism, journalists and their sources, news organizations, corporations, and international organizations. So this is all in the research that was done. Interestingly, we decided we needed to take an activity-centered view of journalism. So it's not who does it, it's what is it. And this drew from the United Nations Human Rights Committee, which said in 2011 that this is for them, the definition of journalism. As you can see, this is a very, very wide definition. In the research, we actually came with a slightly narrower definition, but this is very wide. Anybody who uses any means of mass communication, in other words, if you're blogging, or if you're Facebooking, or if you're tweeting, you could count as this. So this human rights definition has this. For this research, for us, the heart of the matter was not all of these people who use platforms are journalists as such. They may contribute to journalism, but they're not all journalists. Okay, that's fine. At the same time, we thought it was very important to identify who becomes a target, whether they're a journalist or not a journalist, for contributing to journalism. These are the people who are most vulnerable. I think Jeffrey King might disagree slightly with me, so we look forward to some debate on that. There's a definition of journalism that says journalism is something that somebody somewhere doesn't want to see published. Well, not all journalism like that, but particularly the journalism that we are interested in that needs protection is this journalism, this kind of journalism. So if you look at the white writing there, we've said this covers full-time journalists, bloggers, freelancers, citizen journalists, others who publish information in the public interest. In other words, they're not publishing gossip, they're not publishing fiction, they're not publishing entertainment or broadcasting, whatever. But it's also the people who are challenging vested interests who are the most susceptible to threats. Their safety is the most important. That's the heart of the matter. It's also, this research interestingly identified, this is not a gender-blind issue. The safety of journalists matters if you're a woman or if you're a man. If you're a woman, you're going to get abusive emails simply because you're a woman. Okay? If you're a man, you may get harassed and so on, but you won't get the same amount of harassment as if you're a woman. So the safety of journalists is, digital safety is also gender-colored. What is it safety from? I won't go into detail here, but we identified lots of these different issues. I'm sure there's more. The surveillance of journalists, their location tracking, software, hardware, phishing, fake domain attacks, man-in-the-middle attacks, denial of service. In fact, the list goes up to 12 different areas of attacks. I think Jeffrey King will tell us a bit about number 11 also. Number 12, data mining. So some of the insights that come out of this research that we commissioned, and I'm just giving you a few, that digital is much wider than online. You know, much digital information is not necessarily on the internet. It's offline. It's on your laptop, or that's sitting there when you're not connected. It's also on your cell phone, which is not, it's on your telephone calls, which is not necessarily internet-based calls. So we need to have a very wide concept of where are these issues relevant. Second very important thing is that the digital and the physical are really interdependent in this whole question. It's not a question you can be safe in one space and not safe in the other space. These really work hand in hand. The third insight that came is that digital training needs to cover the normative, social, psychosocial, and physical training. This is quite important because journalists don't know very often that there are norms, and those norms are that they should be free and safe, and they have a right to be free and safe in their work. And there are many international instruments, declarations by the UN, and there are national laws often and so on, which actually empower them and which they could use to assert their rights. So the normative side. Psychosocial, a lot of journalists get apathetic. They say, what's the point? There's no point in it. And the physical side, of course. So the last insight that I have on this slide is that it's not only about the people doing journalism, it's also about who they interface with. And not only their sources, by the way, it could be their family or their friends who are inadvertently disclosing information that can compromise the security of people doing journalism. So the more aware a public is about digital safety issues, the better for the safety of journalists where they have an interface with digital. There was some advice to practitioners to actually understand that there's a whole chain here and you can't just patch one point. So you've got to look at all these different points at which you might have vulnerabilities. One little interesting insight in this thing was a recommendation that journalists may consider trying to use the cloud a lot more than their own devices. Why is that? Because if you receive an email with, which looks genuine and it's got an MS Word document or PDF document and you open it on your own laptop, there could easily be a Trojan in there. If you open that same thing in Google Docs, Google has far more powerful security than what you have in your little environment. So, you're possibly going to be better off fighting off these kind of things if you work in the cloud as opposed to if you work on your own devices. That's very interesting. Develop a risk assessment. This, I think, is quite important because you can develop a lot of paranoia around these things and be completely paralyzed around that. And then, having had a risk assessment, to develop a security plan. Understand that these two things are linked, and then, of course, implement. It takes time to do digital security. A lot of journalists get fatigued, as they will tell you in this thing. A bit more advice to practitioners, that practitioners should understand there's never complete one thing or the other. It's always a balancing, making these judgment calls as to what security is called for with what stories, and it's complex. There was a suggestion to use open source technologies on the basis that at least there's a bigger community that can assess to what extent there are vulnerabilities. Many journalists seem to be in their community of journalists and not have intersections with the kind of people who can help them and who are interested in helping them. So linking up. And this is an obvious point, but it just shows the need for ongoing training, ongoing awareness. And I think that's more or less what I've got as a summary, and I'd like to switch to our people. Let me see, I don't know why this is not, there, okay, so let me just sum up. So basically this research says digital security is especially relevant to those who do, the hard-hitting journalism. There's many digital vectors for threats, as I said, I listed some of those, at least there's 12. Delving deeper, this research does give more insight into the issue, so please just watch the UNESCO website. We will release the full research in a publication form coming up. It also identifies, so what do journalists do, what do journalism support groups do, and what should governments be doing to support this. And it mentions it's got a lot of links, including to CPJ and so on. The final sort of takeaway, I think, from this research is that journalism does need special protection. Those who did need to be to think not only for their own personal, but this is a function of a wider environment. So that you've got to start with the digital, but you've got to go much broader. And if I could use the analogy of personal hygiene, you should wash your hands. But remember, if the kitchen's contaminated, it doesn't help too much washing your hands. So you've got to work on all these different levels as well. And you've got to make sure the health inspectors are doing what they should do to protect you as well. So that's the introduction to this research. Now let me introduce you to our great panel. I'm going to ask them to speak for 3 to 5 minutes each, and then we'll throw it open, and then we'll ask them to give comments again. So, first speaker, and I think I'll introduce them as they go. I think that's better. This is Jeffrey King, in the Committee to Protect Journalists, known as CPJ. He's an attorney by training and also a documentary photographer, and he teaches courses in digital privacy and law. So, Jeffrey, over to you.
Thank you. So there are really 3 points that I want to make this morning in the time that we have, and hopefully leave a lot of time for questions at the end and interaction. And the first point is that these attacks, attacks that threaten journalists, and frankly, similar attacks that threaten non-journalists, are getting less expensive. They're getting easier to implement. They are trickling down. They're spreading from some of the most sophisticated sort of labs, intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies. These same kinds of techniques are increasingly going to be in the hands of not only state actors, but non-state actors, not only sophisticated non-state actors like private intelligence firms or large organized crime cartels, but increasingly are going to be available essentially on the free market, perhaps the black market, but are going to become increasingly available to malicious actors that are not traditional threats to journalists in the sense that they're not as predictable. And that, I think, is perhaps the most salient point, that's why I put it first, is everybody has to come to grips with the fact that essentially they are potentially at least under threat. I think we'll see increasingly these sorts of attacks of the various sorts that were described really becoming more frequent, more problematic, easier to pull off. My second point is that one doesn't actually have to do anything particularly reckless or be even particularly prominent or working on controversial issues to be under threat. I think one of the things that I end up hearing a lot is, well, the NSA doesn't care about me, I'm just a little fish, or I'm not working on controversial issues. As to the first point, that may well be the case. We have issues of mass surveillance, but it may well be the case that your primary threat model is a large, sophisticated intelligence agency of any government, and that's a very different threat model if that is the case. But there are a multitude of threat models, as I previously described, and that means that everybody has to be thinking about these things. As I like to say, even if you're just working at a cafe, perhaps even near your house, on a story, and somebody just swipes your laptop to resell, wouldn't you prefer that the hard drive was encrypted than not when that thing makes its way through whatever chains it makes its way through? So in addition to not having to be prominent, as we know, for example, most journalists who are killed are local journalists. In addition to that, we have begun to see research coming out that one doesn't even have to do anything reckless from a technical level. One doesn't have to get a sort of grammatically suspect email that says, here, click on this file that is virus.exe or malware.dmg, and then one clicks on it out of a lack of due caution. We now know, based on the Washington Post report, some research that came out of Citizen Lab, that there's something called a network injection appliance, where one can go to any unencrypted or any website where there's an unencrypted connection, and an attacker with sufficient resources, so about $1 million or so, can take that traffic, inject malware into it, send it along on its way without you ever noticing. The example that was used actually was cute cat videos, not malicious cute cat videos, but just a regular YouTube video, and is captured and then sent back to you with a little extra attached, and that little extra can entirely take over your computer without you knowing. So one does not necessarily have to be working on national security reporting or very high-level crime reporting or working on corruption issues, corruption stories. And additionally, one doesn't have to be displaying a lack of caution, and these things can still happen to you. And so I think that it's incredibly important to understand that at least potentially everybody is at risk. My final point is, despite having a number of colleagues here from governmental and intergovernmental organizations, despite being a lawyer myself and having litigated in the US court system on free speech and free press issues prior to joining CPJ, many of the solutions are not necessarily going to be fully solved by government action. There, I think, are going to be two additional tracks that are going to be extremely important. The first is that companies are, and increasingly this is happening post Snowden disclosures, are working to harden their own networks to encrypt traffic between their data servers to allow for encrypted email, whether through PGP or GPG or Start TLS by default or other similar means. Additionally, though, journalists, despite our limitations, have to engage in self-help, have to come up with threat models and understand that there are a wide range of actors who might harm us, who might harm our sources, who might try to get at our unpublished work product, whether lawfully or unlawfully, and in various rule of law contexts, and take steps such as encrypting one's drives and encrypting one's email, encrypting one's, and using a VPN, using Tor, that's going to increasingly be important. The final point is a sub-point of that, which is that developers and funders who fund these projects need to make these tools easier to use so that it's easy to protect oneself, to be safer when engaging in journalism.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. A quick question. You spoke to me before we began, and you said awareness is a key problem, and you told me an anecdote. Would you like to share that?
Sure. I gave a talk in San Francisco to a large group of specifically investigative reporters and investigative editors. It was a talk about surveillance and how to protect oneself from these issues, and there were several hundred people in the room. It was a plenary. And I at one point said, well, how many of you, through either using open source software or just turning it on through Windows or OS X, have your hard drives encrypted? And of the several hundred people, I would estimate that maybe 7 slowly, reluctantly raised their hands, one of whom, of course, was my executive director, who I had harangued into making sure that was the case. And I then said, well, at the dinner and the happy hour, I will be speaking with each of you individually. But that, I think, shows when we're talking about people who have access to resources and are working on very sensitive issues, when that's the level we're talking about, I think that we have really an awareness issue.
Okay, I'm not going to ask people here to indicate if you have your hard drive encrypted, because I will embarrass myself. But the point is well made. So our next speaker is Professor Eduardo Bertoni. He's the director of the Center for Studies on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information at the University of Palermo in Argentina. Previously, he was the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression in the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights at the OAS, the Organization of American States. Eduardo, please.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to, again, co-host this meeting with UNESCO and the other organizations. I will be very, very brief. I would like to start saying that this is a really good report, useful, and very complete in terms of how the report shows the problems, the threats that the journalists, bloggers, and others are having in terms of the digital, world, or in the digital realm. I would like to make 3 comments. One is a general comment. The second is a comment related to the Latin American approach that the report has. And the third comment is related to what I think that the report could have, or what I would like to see in the report, and it is not in the report. So let's start with my first general comment. I start saying that this is a very good report in the way that shows and explains the kind of threats and problems. But my general comment is that most of them are not just problem for journalists, bloggers, and others. It's also, this report is useful because can help to understand this kind of threats, not only to journalists, but also for example, to human rights defenders. So this might be a report very useful, not just for journalists. This is my general comment. Of course, the approach of UNESCO is for journalists, and that is okay. But I would recommend for anybody, even if it isn't, he or she is not a journalist, to read this report, but because it is possible to understand a lot about what's going on in the digital environment. My second comment is related to the Latin American approach of the report. All of you, if you have an opportunity to read the report, at the end you will say, well, in Latin America there are not many problems. And I don't think that this is the correct message. Maybe the report lacks to have more deep information about Latin America, or the situation is that in Latin America most of the journalists or bloggers are not aware about the problems. So when you ask journalists, and I think that this is the reason why the report doesn't have a lot of information, that there is a lot of misunderstanding, a lack of awareness in Latin American journalists about the problems that they could experience in working in the digital world. The good news is that I think that this situation is changing. The report quotes a very good report that has been made by the International Center for Journalists, and I guess that's Freedom House as well, in Mexico. But again, the more I talk to journalists and bloggers in Latin America, the more I understand that they are not understanding the problems. And you just mentioned that this is something similar that happened in other parts of the world, so maybe it's a trend, and this is something that it is important to work. Even the bibliography of the report doesn't have a lot of Latin American, reports or approach or something. So we Latin Americans need to do more on this issue, and the UNESCO report is a very, very good, resource for us. My third point, in terms of other issues that I would like to see in the report, and I think that they are not there. Sometimes, particularly the way that journalists are using, for example, email accounts, the problem is not that they don't know that they can be hacked, but the problem is that they don't want to use the email account that the media company provides to them because they don't trust in the media company, because the media company can see so that is a very big problem. Many journalists that I talked, they decided to go and use their personal emails, for example, for work, and they are not understanding that this could be a risk. But at the same time, there is a relation between the companies, the media companies, and the journalists. A lot of mistrust there, and this is something that we need to take into account. And also, we need to take into account that sometimes the duty of the media companies to train journalists on all of this problem is not very well delivered in Latin America. I don't know what's going on in other parts of the world. So this is something that should be, I would like to see in the report, and it is not there. It's like to put in the agenda. And the second point is my favorite thing, which is something that I mentioned in a workshop like this last year in Bali, which is the problem of defamation online and jurisdiction. It is not usually take this problem as a digital safety problem, but I like to put this as a digital safety problem as well. The problem is very easy or very clear because you have different laws in different countries. Now when you're a blogger or when you're working for a digital newspaper, for example, you could have problems on criminal defamation in different jurisdictions than the one that you are based. And this could be a problem. I like that last night I was reading the new book of Wolfgang Benedict that is here on freedom of expression in the internet, and he has a chapter on this, a short chapter on this. I think that Wolfgang is not that pessimistic that I am. My book on defamation online and jurisdictional problems quote a lot of cases. There is not a problem now in Latin America, I should say that. I didn't find in my research real problems on that, but I think that because we have different defamation laws, in some jurisdiction criminal defamation, in other jurisdiction not criminal defamation, this could be a problem in Latin America, and I would like to put this problem into the digital safety problem. Usually it's not in that under that framework, but I think that should be, and this is a discussion that we can continue here. So to finish, this is a very important issue, the digital safety for journalists, and it is very important for Latin America. And an announcement is that in our center, we are organizing the second edition, what we call CELE 2014. Last edition was last year, where we discussed with organizations, human rights organizations, journalists, problems related to internet regulations. Last year we didn't include the problem of digital safety. This year we will include one blog on digital safety as well. So that's all. Thank you.
Super, thank you, Eduardo. And I didn't mention, of course, but he did that. This session is co-organized by CELE and by CPJ and by Article 19. So our next speaker is actually, of course, from Article 19. It's Laura Tresca. She works as the Brazil Freedom of Expression Officer. And before that, she was a journalist in community radio, magazines, website, blogs, and online media. Laura, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Sorry to be late. To be late is almost a tradition in Brazil. Good morning, everyone. I work for Article 19. Article 19 is an international organization that focuses on protection of freedom of expression, and it has offices in several countries, including Brazil. We keep a protection program to monitor freedom of expression violations, offer trainings, advocacy for public policies related to protection, and support and threaten people. I totally agree with Bertoni that we know by experience that these threats, it's not only related to journalists, and the threats that are usually focused on journalists are now spread by the net. I mean, nowadays, bloggers and internet users are also target of death threats or lawsuits, for example, due to the content they post online. I know that this is an international forum, but I would like to bring some examples of my country, Brazil, just to help us to have some concrete base for our debate. I want to tell you the case of João Revolta. In English is John Revolt. He has a channel at the YouTube called John Revolt. His videos are based on reports submitted by internet users and investigated by John himself. Early 2013, he posted some videos about a business company, involved some politicians and religious people. First, some threatening messages were written in the comments of the video. And several months after, 6-7 months after, the comments, they keep posting comments, and some people linked to the company made a campaign for people to threaten him at the YouTube channel through through the comments. And this campaign was very successful. Sometimes there were 20 comments in every 20 seconds. And then someone tried to break up his digital accounts, including the YouTube channel, but no success. Finally, he started to receive calls at his home in order to remove those specific videos. John took pictures of the comments, told the police about the phone calls, but the police didn't register the Jones case because they told him that there was no specific threat occurred. So in this context, for us, it's very important to discuss and promote the bloggers' right, internet users' right. We also believe that this should be a specific topic on internet governance debate. Bloggers and internet users, they don't have a news institution behind them and to protect them. And this cannot be considered an individual problem. Last year at the IGF, we launched the publication Right to Blog to promote this specific agenda. But today I would like to congratulate UNESCO's publication. I guess that location tracking, software and hardware surveillance without knowledge of the target, phishing attacks, fake domain attacks, DDoS, cyberstalking, data storage, are some of the issues pointed out at the publication that drive us to another level of discussion on online violations, not only for journalists. For me, it's important to highlight that it's not only journalists that are exposed to this kind of threat. We had the John case in Brazil last year, for example. Besides that, last year we had a lot of public demonstrations in Brazil. You probably heard about that. And the government intelligence agencies start to monitor online activists. After that, 3 page administrators from Facebook were arrested at their homes, charged by criminal conspiracy and incitement to violence. This year, 1 week before the end of the World Cup, 23 activists were arrested because they could represent a threat to the following games. These activists had their phones recorded and were being monitored online. And the excuse was the same everywhere else. The intention is to avoid and prevent violent acts. But we know that these surveillance policies have political motivations, since the reasons are usually inconsistent. But, well, this is the scene in Brazil, but we know that these are problems in several countries. It's not only a Brazilian problem. So I think this is an internet governance debate. And I think that UNESCO's publication is very useful for us to spot these threats and address these kinds of situations in several countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Our next speaker is Dr. Sylvia Grundmann from the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. She's head of the media division in the Information Society department there, which is part of the bigger Directorate for General Human Rights and the Rule of Law. She's a former judge and a professor and a lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guy. Much too much waste of time with the bio, but okay. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would very much laud this initiative of UNESCO to go into this field of digital safety, because from what I've seen so far when it comes to new technologies and the internet and everything, there seems to be a tendency to think this is new, so it must be a lawless field, and then the gaps occur. But thanks to this initiative, I'm confident there won't be so many gaps as things will be laid open. And then that enables, for instance, courts to kick in quickly and use this information, and that is very important. As the judiciary is conservative and sometimes slow, they need really a good information, reliable information, and I think this is a big contribution to it. Now, journalists need protection, that's very clear, and they need it in the real world as well, as that is where they are mainly attacked, physically attacked, aggressed. And the Council of Europe, a European, pan-European organization with 47 member states, we have since some time grasped that this is an important topic, safety of journalists, and we have tried to find a way how to go beyond our traditional standard setting activities and do something more concrete. So standard setting activities, what we do in the Committee of Ministers is we do soft law, we make recommendations, declarations, the states bind themselves, but then of course there is always a question of implementation. And as we all know, human rights, generally speaking, have big implementation gaps. Now, how could we more concretely close these gaps? That was our question. And we made some, so we had a big ministerial conference in Belgrade last year in November, where we pushed the topic of safety of journalists. And then in the follow-up to that, we came up with an idea that had also been sponsored by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and that is an internet-based platform for safety of journalists. So the Secretary General, newly and really re-elected, Torbjörn Jagland of the Council of Europe, he is now taking this up. It's his initiative. A platform for safety of journalists, and we are currently looking into the modalities, and I'm very grateful for the support that we are getting, because UNESCO is on board, and so is Article 19, and some other NGOs, and of course also the OSCE with their freedom of expression rapporteur. So, and what we did, and I won't go into too many details here, we started out with a big roundtable in April this year. So if you Google roundtable safety of journalists, you come right to then our website. By the way, I had some problems yesterday and today about access to the internet here. I don't know whether I'm the only one. And I joked about it before to a colleague. Isn't that strange? Now, so our website, everything is there, very, very good material on this roundtable and on all the questions such a project, such a platform for safety of journalists raises. We'll be getting there, I think, but it will be a slow process also because of political will. We will need to have our stakeholders on board. That means all the 47 member states, and the topic has not yet been discussed in the Committee of Ministers. The member states, they have in principle agreed on the usefulness of such a platform, which we felt as an encouragement and which led us to investing all this time, but then the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. So let's see. what I want to stress here also is...
Sylvie, sorry, if you could begin to wind up, just because of time. Thanks.
That digital safety is a very important brick in the wall of the enabling environment for journalists. And I just want to conclude with a quote from the court's case law, the European Court of Human Rights, from the, as we are in Turkey, Hrant Dink case, and where the court really developed this notion of the enabling environment for the first time and spelled it out and made it clear that states have a positive obligation to create this enabling environment so that everybody can express their opinions and ideas without fear. And so therefore, the digital safety is an important part of this enabling environment. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us. So our last speaker is Mr. Scott Busby. He's Deputy Assistant Secretary in the US State Department, particularly in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor. He oversees the Bureau's work in East Asia and the Pacific on various issues, including LGBT rights, internet freedom, and business and human rights. And he's previously been Director for Human Rights in National Security Staff in the White House. And before that, he was Coordinator on Intergovernmental Consultations on Migration, Asylum, and Refugees based out of Geneva then. Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Guy. And thanks to you and UNESCO for pulling together this very useful report. We will look at it with great interest and see how it can inform both our policies and programs. Thanks too to UNESCO for speaking out so loudly and forcefully in all of the many cases in which journalists are under threat, be they digital journalists or more traditional journalists. I simply want to say that the US remains deeply committed to a free and open press. The President and Secretary of State have made this clear repeatedly. How do we try to carry that out? One, we seek to speak out forcefully on individual cases of concern. We now annually have a Free the Press campaign each spring in the run-up to World Press Freedom Day, where we identify particular cases of concern and urge the governments holding those individuals to release those journalists, be they digital or traditional. We also have a wide number of programs to promote digital safety, both for journalists and for activists, and for average citizens for that matter. These trainings are implemented by a wide array of people in a wide array of places. We call them sort of public health style digital hygiene campaigns. We'd be happy to share information about those with all of you. We are also very focused on issues of free expression for journalists and others in the Freedom Online Coalition, a group of 23 countries from around the world who have come together to try to promote free expression online. And through that coalition, we do have something called the Digital Defenders Partnership, which supports journalists and activists under threat. And again, we would urge those of you who are aware of particular cases or organizations with troubles to identify those to us so we can consider them for support and protection. And lastly, let me just say that in terms of US surveillance programs, which I know have been the subject of a great deal of scrutiny and attention in recent months, the President's reform efforts in this area are very much informed by the wish to allow journalists and other human rights activists to continue with their critical activities. The President has made clear that to the extent that surveillance is conducted, it's done for specific purposes, be it counterintelligence, to address terrorism, to address transnational crime. Happy to discuss those at greater length. And lastly, we welcome your comments and recommendations. We can't do our work effectively without the advice and input of civil society including journalists. So I'm very interested to hear your comments and concerns. Thank you.
Well, who would like to make some quick comments in addition to what you've heard? This question, digital safety for those who do journalism. Please introduce yourself very quickly and keep your comments tight. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Wolfgang Benedek, University of Graz in Austria. Thank you for this very interesting panel and publication. Unfortunately, there is a lot of lip service to the issue of safety of journalists. It's good that there is awareness raising, but the real issue is in the operationalization, as we have seen. I wanted to follow up on Bertoni when he said that it's also important to look at issues like defamation, laws, etc. And there is the physical safety, which I think is certainly overriding concern, but there's also the issue of legal safety of journalists. And I would like to point out that increasingly we see laws being amended with regard to defamation laws in particular, information laws, internet laws, etc., which create more and more risks for journalists and in particular also for people who are working digital, who are doing online work, who are bloggers, etc. One could give the example of Turkey with the internet law here, where the defamation provisions have been enlarged and it makes it more difficult in practice for journalists. Also the prosecutors in Turkey, they have only limited time to start investigations, so they go for it in any case. This makes harassment for the journalists, and that increases the difficulties. Another example could be Russia, where recently they have changed the information law in a sense that it will make it more difficult for bloggers to do their job, and they have to register if they have a number of readers on their pages. Then they have to respect the laws on mass media in Russia, which means that the content is easily to be brought before a court and so on. So that is what I mean. Legal harassment is one of the issues which we find increasingly now also in the online field, because this is where, so to say, free expression has moved to, as already the offline field is more or less under control. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Grégoire Pouget. I'm working for Reporters Without Borders. So I'm very happy to be here at this panel, and very happy that the UNESCO is doing a lot of stuff on digital safety. But the discussion was very interesting, but I think that something missed, or maybe I didn't hear maybe I was not attentive enough. You talked about the fact that we have to raise awareness on the digital safety of journalists, and this is what you do with handbooks and guides and conference roundtables. But we can also do trainings, and I know this is not the purpose of the UNESCO especially, but something that really missed, I didn't heard about that, except that the technology to spy on journalists and bloggers are less and less expensive. So you say that this is fact, but there is something we can do about that. We can, and this is really an emergency, we can ask to governments, to the European Union to regulate, and they have to, we need a juridical framework in order to control the exportation of surveillance technologies. So I know this is not the policy here at the IGF to name and shame companies or people or bloggers, but 2 years ago, Reporters Without Borders published a report about surveillance companies. We even filed a formal complaint with the OECD about 5 companies that sell surveillance technologies. Gamma, International, Finfisher, Hacking Team, Blue Coat, and I say it as a name Blue Coat because there's someone from the United States here, and you can do something about that. And Trobicore, which is a German company. So we filed for a formal complaint against 2 of those companies 1.5 years ago, against Trovicor and against Gamma International, with different NGOs such as Privacy International. Today, our formal complaint against Trovicor has not been accepted by the OECD, so it's done. And our formal complaint against Gamma International is still running, but we don't have any news because the OECD is investigating. So it's been 1.5 years, and in 1.5 years, can you imagine how many journalists have been spied on by the technology sold by Gamma International? So there's a real emergency to do something to regulate, and we need a juridical framework to control the export of surveillance technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. Let's have one more comment, and then I'll ask a tweet, because the next session is starting in 15 minutes, so we can run for another 5. But let's have one comment, and then we go there.
Thank you. I'm Joellen Kaiser. I'm from the Media Consortium in the United States. We represent independent media. I heard Jeffrey King talk about the way that corporations can strengthen their security to help protect email traffic. But we're also concerned about corporate spying and corporate surveillance of journalists and dangers to journalists from corporations. We're concerned both about the way that Facebook and telecoms have offered governments information about personal information about journalists, and also about big oil and gas companies and other kinds of big players who are very concerned about journalist reports and journalist investigations of them. So I feel that it's not just state actors who are a danger to journalists, but also these kinds of non-state multinational corporations.
Right, let's have a quick tweet from each of our panelists. Yeah.
As I believe the movie version, not the book version of Catch-22 said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
I just want to add that I'm glad that my colleague from the other side of the Atlantic, Wolfgang Benedict, also think that digital safety should include legal safety in terms of defamation laws and the legal environment. So I think that this is something that we need to continue working and maybe include in this arena as well.
I totally agree that it's not only a state threatened, but the company business threatened too. And I bring the John Revolt case because it was a company threatened.
I join the speakers on this issue of legal safety and digital safety. And I think that we will incorporate this into our awareness-raising activities, notably when it comes to training the judiciary at the Council of Europe. Thank you.
And let me address the issue of surveillance technologies that our colleague from Reporters Without Borders raised. It's an issue of great concern to us, not only because some of the companies doing this are American companies, but I would point out that the issue is being addressed under the Wassenaar arrangement for the non-proliferation of dangerous items. It formerly dealt with weapons, and now it's looking at surveillance technologies. And I would urge you and others in the room to look at this arrangement and encourage your governments, including my own, to see whether this, the Wassenaar agreement can successfully address this problem. Thank you.
Okay, it remains for me to thank you all for participating, to say that this is clearly a growing issue, growing in scope and growing in intensity, growing in frequency. So I suggest we meet again at IGF next year and take stock of further developments. We had a good review of the problems, also of some attempts to address some of them. We had perspectives about the need to broaden the picture to the legal question. I think it's been a rich panel, so can we give a round of applause to our panelists? Thank you. And if you're interested in these issues, there's another panel starting here at 10:15, which is debating some of these issues as well. Thank you.